So before the break, we discussed the politics of impeachment. In this segment, we take a look at the legal case against the president, which continues to build by the day. Now, just yesterday, House Democrats released dozens of pages of documents from Lev Parnas. He, the Giuliani associate who got arrested, then agreed to cooperate with Congress. Now, that information, it will be transmitted to the Senate as part of the articles of impeachment. It includes a handwritten note from Parnas on Ritz-Carlton stationery that you see there from Vienna with what appears to be a to-do list. One bullet point says, get Zelensky to announce that the Biden case will be investigated. Another says, go to D.C. with package and use my magic to cut a deal. Also included, a letter from Rudy Giuliani to the Ukrainian president where Rudy, he's requesting a meeting with President Zelensky. In that letter, Rudy also says President Trump has the, quote, knowledge and consent of what Giuliani is doing. That's the first document we've seen that clearly says the president was directing his personal attorney's actions on Ukraine. Also released, text messages between Parnas and Ukrainian prosecutor Yuri Lutsenko that show the pressure campaign to fire the ambassador, Maria Yovanovitch. Now, one of them, from Lutsenko to Parnas, says, and here you can't even get rid of one female fool. To which Parnas responded, she's not a simple fool, trust me, but she's not getting away. Yovanovitch didn't get away. As we know, Trump fired her. Other text messages from Republican congressional candidate Robert Hyde in Connecticut indicate Yovanovitch was under surveillance while in Kiev. The former ambassador, she's now demanding an investigation into it, and when you see what some of these comments were, you'll understand why. I'm going to read some of the texts that this rocket scientist Hyde sent. Quote, wake up, Yankees, man. Apparently a reference to Giuliani. She's talked to 3 people. Her phone is off. Computer is off. She's next to the embassy, not in the embassy. Private security has been there since Thursday. Here another one. Quote, that address I sent you checks out. They're willing to help if you would like a price. Guess you can do anything in Ukraine with money, what I was told. Now, for what it's worth, Hyde saying he was joking around and drunk texting. Again, that's his rationale. But all of this new evidence, it builds upon the testimony we heard from more than a dozen witnesses during the House hearings. And again, here's a sample.
So we followed the president's orders. Was there a quid pro quo? As I testified previously, with regard to the requested White House call and the White House meeting, the answer is yes. Everyone was in the loop.
There will be a meeting if the Ukrainians open up or announce these investigations into 2016 in Burisma. It was clear that Burisma was code for the Bidens.
I listened on the call in the Situation Room with White House colleagues. I was concerned by the call. It is improper for the President of the United States to demand a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen and a political opponent.
Mr. Giuliani's requests were a quid pro quo for arranging a White House visit for President Zelensky. Mr. Giuliani demanded that Ukraine make a public statement announcing the investigations of the 2016 election.
So that was a quick primer. Let's bring in our next guest, the sartorial wonder, former federal prosecutor Roland Riopelle. And Roland, before I get into where we go from here in terms of the case, a sitting U.S. ambassador who had served under multiple administrations, both political parties and everything else, because she had the temerity to push back on some of the unsavory characters in Ukraine, and she wasn't going to go along to get along with apparently what Trump and friends wanted to do. We have a guy who, I don't care how he explains it away, he physically was surveilling and then hinting at a hit on a U.S. ambassador in the advance of a political campaign. You can't make this up if you tried.
No, you really can't, Richard. It's so awful. So improper. I'm at a loss for words to describe how far out and wrong and beyond the bounds of all propriety this is. It's a great thing that Nancy Pelosi slow-walked the articles of impeachment, however, because it's given Congress time to gather more facts and disclose them. And this will put a lot of pressure on the Senate to permit witnesses and additional documentary evidence.
Just heard from Dana Milbank from the Washington Post, who made the same argument that you did, that the 28-day gap, if you will, it may not change the final tally, but it served a purpose. I didn't really see it that way, but I'm starting to come around to it. But to that end, let's play Monday morning quarterback here, or Monday evening quarterback. If she had to do it over again, I know all the rationales where there was a race to get to the door because of the integrity of the election being compromised and all the rest. I get that. But should they have subpoenaed Bolton? Should they have subpoenaed some of the folks from the Congressional Budget Office, et cetera? Should that have taken place in the House, given the uncertainty in the Senate?
You know, Richard, my law partner and I had this argument over lunch, and I think he may have had the better of it. There is a lot of reason to think that as this new and very troubling evidence dribbles out, there's a lot of reason to think it would have made sense to hold the articles of impeachment until you manage to get the testimony of Mr. Bolton and the others under your belt, because it sure seems like that testimony would have been pretty terrible for the president. That said, it probably was also very important to get these articles of impeachment in front of the Senate as fast as possible, because the evidence is very strong for those articles that were returned. It's a tough argument, but I sure see the other side of it, Roland, as you do.
Roland, I would argue there was a compelling case laid out in the House, and we saw the party line vote, and we've seen already what Mitch McConnell has put out there. If he could dismiss this thing, he would, and he certainly doesn't want to have witnesses. I'm going to give you a hypothetical, which isn't so hypothetical. To get the 4 Republican senators to give assurances that they will not agree and sign on to something that has no witnesses, if there's a horse trade to be made, the Democrats are going to have to put up certain witnesses they'll have to give to get a Bolton or others. Is that a trade worth making? I know the Hunter and the Joe Bidens don't make sense, but there's other names put out there, the whistleblower, et cetera. How far would you go to put Bolton in a chair?
Well, if you could get Bolton, Mulvaney, Pompeo, all the witnesses, and the Duffy, the witnesses from the OMB, if you could get an agreement to put all of them in the chair, I would probably trade any witnesses the Republicans want to call. I mean, let's face it, Hunter Biden's going to have nothing to say that's of any relevance to this. Joe Biden, if he's smart, can turn this into a pretty strong statement to his base to help himself win the Democratic nomination. I don't know who else the Republicans really want to have, but that's all going to be seen as distraction and stupidity. And if you can get the substantive testimony of those other witnesses that the Democrats want, I think that's a trade worth making, frankly. And then you make fun of the fact that Republicans have no defense other than a lot of smoke and mirrors. Go ahead.
I got to think this revelation that we just started our conversation with Parnas, that's got to be a part of what happens at the Senate, right?
I would think so. Why not subpoena Lev Parnas? Let's see what he's got to say. I mean, you know, you've got a pretty good documentary record to tie to him and force him to agree to. Just getting that out in front of the public with testimony is probably well worth the candle.
You saw the House managers that are going to be laid out there. I think there isn't a person who thinks, at least for the people laying out the case against the president, that there's a better equipped person on that panel than Adam Schiff. To that end, what do you understand about how the process is going to work as it relates to the House managers once they work out the rules, et cetera? Who does the questioning? What are the rules of the road here? And I know there's not one set here for every single impeachment. It is to be negotiated, but give me your best guess.
Well, in past impeachments, and actually Congressman Schiff has been a House manager for at least one involving a United States district judge who was impeached. In past impeachments, the House managers have done questioning. They can have their counsel do questioning. I wouldn't be surprised if they used that option. They have very able professional counsel who have worked with them. You know, it's ultimately going to be up to the Senate how this will proceed. And if Mitch McConnell can muster 51 votes to allow no testimony, there won't be any questions. We'll have to see what the Senate approves of. But if there is going to be testimony and there is going to be further evidence, I would expect the House managers to be very much involved in that process.
Last question, and it deals with the final player, which is Chief Justice Roberts. Most people think that his role will basically be to be like an ump here. If he does a good job, he's very rarely seen, if not heard. Do you think when this is said and done, he will play a key role, or is he basically there just to, you know, balls and strikes and that's it?
I don't even know that he'll be calling balls and strikes, Richard. I think he's going to be the equivalent of an appendix, the one you have in your stomach here. He's not going to do much at all. His role is going to be ceremonial. He strikes me as the type of guy who's going to be very reluctant to try to be involved because he's afraid that will damage the reputation of the Supreme Court. And ultimately, the Senate makes the rules. I don't think he's going to be given much opportunity to call balls and strikes or anything else. I think he's going to sit up there and nod his head, call the proceedings to order and get it started, and gavel them to a close. And other than that, I think he's going to be a non-entity and have no real effect. That's my guess, but we'll see.
It's going to be fascinating what a handful of Republicans will decide to do or not do with witnesses et al. Here. Roland, love the bow tie and the whole ensemble. I appreciate the time as always. Thank you.
Terrific. Good to be with you, Richard.
All right. When we come back, everyone, we've gotten to the point where the worst of the worst dictators, they really feel that they've got a friend in our White House. After the break, we'll show you exactly what we mean.